Everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on upgrading your lab and moving your sample management out of spreadsheets. Some quick housekeeping before we jump in. This recording is going to be shared after the webinar today. So if you're not able to stay for the whole time or want to share this with folks, that will be made available to you. And feel free to put any questions that you have during the webinar in the chat or the Q&A, and we'll work to get to them after the presentation. So I'm Hannah Brackey. I'm the Director of Product here at LabKey, and I'm super excited to discuss this topic today. I've worked with dozens of labs to help move them out of spreadsheets into more robust solutions. And prior to working at LabKey, I actually was a bench scientist for over a decade, either working in spreadsheets or trying to figure out ways of getting out of spreadsheets. So this is a topic near and dear to my heart, and happy to share it with you guys today. So before we start talking about why spreadsheets are suboptimal, let's really try and think about some reasons why we use spreadsheets. So I'd love this to be a little bit more interactive. So if you want to post in the chat or the Q&A really quickly, what are you using spreadsheets for? Why are reasons that you're using spreadsheets? That would be great. I will get us started with one here, hopefully sort of an easy one. That spreadsheets are cheap. They often come for free or as sort of part of the overhead costs from our organizations. And so oftentimes people will lean on that as sort of the most affordable option. Right, quick, easy, customizable, being able to sort of keep track of things. It's very flexible. I totally agree with all of these. I'll put in some of the other ones that I have. Spreadsheets are super convenient, right? Most people can access them from their computers. Yeah, they're great for sort of managing all sorts of different things, very easy to sort, I agree. Spreadsheets are also really accessible. So probably everyone at this stage in 2024 knows how to use a spreadsheet basically, and really requires no training to get sort of ramped up. Any others here that got added? And then the last one I think that kind of points to what some of us have put in the chat here is that spreadsheets are efficient to begin with. It's super easy to get them up and running and start using so you can get into the science, right? Yeah, people already know how to use them without that learning curve, and that can be really important for folks. So if we want to start considering sort of what aspects are important, particularly in sample management, it's not really a surprise that spreadsheets may not stack up as well in supporting these core tenets for sample management. And so if we start thinking about being able to identify every sample accurately and unambiguously, this usually is sort of requiring a unique accessioning and clear sample labeling. It helps ensure that samples are correctly identified throughout their life cycle. And by identifying these distinct values and adhering to those standard labeling protocols, we can really help to mitigate the risk of sample mix-ups and really facilitate that seamless sample tracking and retrieval. Spreadsheets don't often do this for us very easily, so my grade for them is sort of D+. Happy to hear again in the chat kind of what you might grade your spreadsheet in this for. And if we start to think about sort of sample traceability, tracing that complete lineage and provenance of each sample from basically where it originated to its current state, as well as any associated metadata, it's super important to understand and analyze that downstream data with those pieces in mind. And also for many of us, sample chain of custody is a vital component for the lab to track to meet those compliant requirements as well. And I think that spreadsheets do the worst probably at supporting traceability without sort of those robust auditing tools or more complex data structures that a lot of data management systems will have. So my score here is that they get an F. Again, happy to kind of hear how you might grade them in the chat as well. And then lastly, sort of as the volume and diversity of samples within your laboratory increases, so too does the importance of, findability. You really want to be able to find samples quickly and efficiently based on certain attributes or whether or not, they're in a freezer that you're using. And so these robust findability mechanisms really can be essential in sort of optimizing lab workflows or being able to start experiments or continue on with them. And I think that if a group is really tracking location well in spreadsheets, you can pretty much find samples as long as the spreadsheet is sort of working in your favor. So I think this is not too bad of a grade necessarily, where we're giving it kind of a B minus, right? Like it's certainly a great tool to be able to find those samples if you're using it in that way. So if we've covered kind of labs are relying on these spreadsheets in the pursuit of convenient tools for organizing and analyzing data, but they can really come with these significant limitations in supporting sample management, as well as potentially introducing larger overall data issues within the lab. So a few more of these kind of systemic problems that might occur. A big one is around data integrity. So spreadsheets, probably as you know, are really susceptible to human errors, typos, sorting and filtering mistakes. I've made a few of those in my past, copying and pasting kind of in the wrong cells or in the wrong place. All of these can have a really significant impact on data integrity. And worse, these errors can then propagate throughout the data and really lead to sort of later inaccuracies and inconsistencies in those final results. Spreadsheets can also really lack that robust data validation or standardization that we need, making it super challenging to maintain this data integrity over time and kind of as your lab gets bigger and more complex as well. Maintaining things like an audit trail are really crucial for that scientific reproducibility and sometimes for regulatory compliance, depending on what environment you're working in. Spreadsheets really lack those built-in mechanisms to track changes and maintaining that clear audit trail. And really without this traceability, it becomes challenging to determine, who made what change and when, making troubleshooting super hard when something has gone wrong. And ultimately sort of compromising that overall goal of data reliability. And then the last one we have here is scalability. So as labs grow in size and complexity, spreadsheets can often really struggle to keep pace with this. Managing either a super massive spreadsheet or a whole bunch of small spreadsheets can really get unwieldy and inefficient very quickly, leading to sort of decreased productivity in the lab, as well as an increased risk of errors and of course, those other downstream effects. In sort of the worst case, I've witnessed and had myself kind of data corruption, our Excel file gets too big, we can't open it anymore. And so wanting to make sure that we have systems in place that help us scale most efficiently. There are a few kind of others that aren't on this slide and would love to hear kind of again in the chat, like what you guys think around what you've struggled with for spreadsheets. But things like limited functionality. So spreadsheets are designed for much more that multi-use, kind of that flexibility that we talked about earlier. But that means they also really lack specialized functionality that might be needed for laboratory specific workflows, like checking samples in and out of storage and managing kind of volumes over time or aliquoting or deriving samples. Dependency on individual expertise, it's certainly happened in my past lifetime where somebody has gotten really good at Excel macros and then leaves the lab, and none of us know how to use it or maintain it as we change things. And so that can cause a pretty significant disruption in sort of data management as well, and cause you to sort of scramble looking for a new solution. And then of course, like version control issues, right? Especially if a lot of people are collaborating or using the same spreadsheet, there can be issues with understanding if you're making changes on sort of an outdated version of the data, or using that for other purposes as well. And so, hopefully this is why we're all here today, but, while spreadsheets are valuable tools for labs to get started initially, they really start to degrade in utility over time and as labs grow and change. And so to combat some of these concerns, folks can really work to invest in specialized data management solutions that are much more tailored to their unique needs. And so, of course, this is really exciting, but there's a lot of tools out there, and the choices and decisions can get really overwhelming. So let's talk about kind of what this process might look like to leave spreadsheets, go beyond spreadsheets. I broke this down or kind of summarized this into 5 main steps. Each of these could probably be a webinar on its own, but evaluating your lab's needs, conducting that research to figure out what potential solution is going to help solve those needs, and making that decision on what ends up being the best fit for your lab, as well as then ultimately sort of organizing and getting your lab ready to adopt that new system. So the first step of sort of evaluation, we really want to conduct a comprehensive evaluation of your lab's data management needs. So engage with key stakeholders, which primarily is going to be lab folks, but think about lab managers or PIs or IT professionals to help you gain insights into sort of those current pain points and inefficiencies that might be there within the lab. Also make sure you're sort of considering those future factors such as data volume or complexity, regulatory requirements that may come up, and scaling over time to really help identify what are those most pressing challenges that you want to focus on during your search. Take a look also at what spreadsheets the lab is using super heavily, and categorize how they're being used to best narrow down sort of your potential solutions. And so to do this, there are kind of 4 main categories that I find of spreadsheet usage in the lab. A single spreadsheet could do one or more of these things, but oftentimes we'll see kind of a sprinkle of everything kind of across the board, depending on what type of science you're doing. So when you're looking at these spreadsheets, look at spreadsheets that are tracking sort of lists of samples or inventory items. I think somebody mentioned that earlier. That's what they were doing with their spreadsheets. Stating their locations and freezers, capturing critical metadata, like when the sample was received or how much of it was there. It's most likely acting as sort of a sample or inventory management system. And so that might point you in the right direction as you're looking for solutions. If the spreadsheet is being used for a tool as sort of who's doing work or sample or work request systems, you're passing spreadsheets from one department or functional group to another, you may be really looking for solutions that offer lab process or workflow management tools. I think somebody else kind of made a point of like record of purchasing earlier. And so that might be something that you're looking for within a solution as well. Nearly every lab has spreadsheets that are generated directly from instruments. We're not going to get away from that necessarily, but also spreadsheets where teams are using those spreadsheets for different stages of the data cleaning and analysis, or possibly tracking other pieces of their experiment, like experiment design, or making notes of their experiment within a spreadsheet or a file. What we're looking for here are then going to be solutions that talk about experiment management that can help us organize these different types of files. And then another really common use of spreadsheets is sort of reporting of all flavors, sort of that internal resource planning, but as well as creating reports for external bodies like regulatory agencies, collaborators, submissions for funding, things like that. So if you have a lot of spreadsheets that are assembling reports, make sure that the tool that you're looking to adopt will also include that functionality. So in an ideal world, your lab wouldn't be using many spreadsheets, but I think that's not realistic for many of the reasons we've already covered. So to get the most out of this process, make sure you're first identifying what those pain points are within your lab. That is going to help customize the solution to what you need, not give you kind of this big giant piece of homework of what you could have in sort of this ideal scenario. So once you have identified and agreed upon these pain points, really determine how to prioritize them. So I like to encourage folks to start with sort of highest risk items like lack of sample traceability or things that might be, more time consuming, like spending hours or days looking for samples in the freezer. And another approach, if you're super strapped for time or just really want a quick win for the lab, is to pick sort of the easiest or most simple thing to put into a data management system that will help kind of gain that momentum to move out of spreadsheets overall. And then before you start researching, you also want to make sure that you're sort of aligned on the goals as a group. Are you looking for a solution that's going to be for a specific project or for a certain team within the lab? Maybe that's where you want to start, or really aiming to tackle an entire sort of laboratory solution for everyone. This is going to help you sort of narrow your research down to what solutions are going to help serve those most immediate goals. And so now we're going to do something that we're all really comfortable with. We're going to research. And when you are searching for things or looking for this, there's going to be some terms that you're likely to encounter. And so we'll kind of talk about each of these and what these mean from kind of a software or functional perspective. So freezer management systems are just like they sound. They track where things are in the freezer. They'll often also allow you to capture some type of information about those samples as well. And this type of solution is really going to help make it easier to find samples when you need them. So support that sample findability tenet. Sample or inventory management systems usually kind of go a step further. They help accession samples, they track chain of custody, and allow you to trace sample lineage. These tools will really help with sort of those tenets of sample identification as well as traceability. They'll often also include a freezer management tool. So sometimes you can get kind of all three captured in that sample management system. There are electronic lab notebooks, which is probably the most common sort of data management solution that people are familiar with today. And these can really vary from a variety of things of like this like paper on glass concept tool to sort of the fully integrated data connected solutions that really work in tandem with sample management or LIMS solutions. They really are going to help best with capturing experimental data, kind of, what you're normally writing down in a notebook, but then also being able to understand what's happened to a sample during an experiment. And sometimes with these systems, when they're integrated with others, it can also help with sample traceability or findability potentially as well. And the last one here is sort of the laboratory information management solution, or LIMS. These are really sort of the complete lab solution. They may incorporate, one or all of the other things above it, and also include other functionality like instrument integration and equipment integration. These are typically sort of labeled as like the ultimate solution, but they also can sometimes come at a higher price point or more intense resources. So really considering where your needs are can help limit sort of the scope of the solution that you need at this time, and then maybe in the future as well. So once you've kind of identified what type of solution you might be looking for, there's also a few key terms that are going to be helpful for you to understand how those correlate with problems that you might be experiencing in the lab. And again, the goal is to continue to sort of narrow that search for a solution that's going to fit you and your lab specific needs. So if you found that your spreadsheets weren't supporting sample identification, you really want to look for solutions that are marketing terms or talking about terms like sample accessioning or label printing, and make sure that they actually support work in the lab, like doing bulk actions or making it really easy for people to accession or identify those samples. Um, Terms like chain of custody or audit logs, lineage graphs are all going to sort of indicate that the software can help support the tracking and traceability of samples. And then lastly, if you're struggling with finding samples, looking for those freezer management solutions or solutions that talk about freezer management, searching tools, or even sort of more robust querying or reporting capabilities as well. And so at this point, you've kind of picked a couple of the solution types. You might be even narrowing down to a few of the solutions that you're looking for. The next step is really to do a thorough evaluation to assess the right fit for your lab. So in order to do this, we really encourage kind of these 5 things among others, but the most important one is sort of testing those real world scenarios. So using your data and processes to test the software and to get a clear idea of how well it can handle your workflows and data is going to be really important in assessing that fit. Evaluating user friendliness. So when you're testing your scenarios, make a note of how easy it is to understand where to find something or how to get somewhere within the software. A steep learning curve now might lead to sort of issues with adoption or abandonment in these future stages that we're going to talk about. You want to check the flexibility and also the scalability of the solution. And so really determine how easily the software can be adjusted to fit your requirements. And this is where that real world data can really help, and understand if that solution is going to be flexible enough for your lab kind of in its present form, but also as the lab sort of grows and the research expands. So also kind of make note of how it might handle sort of an increasing volume of samples or workflows or ELNs, and how easy it's going to be to integrate or adapt to those new processes in the future. You'll also want to do kind of the prerequisite of data management and security. So making sure that you know how the software is managing the storage, how they're doing backups and recoveries, or if that's kind of on you or the organization. Make sure that there are enough security measures to protect sensitive information that you have in your lab, if you have it, and really make sure that those measures are aligned with what your organizational standards are. So get sort of the IT team involved and make sure that they're looking at this solution and putting their mark of approval on it as well. And then the last thing, and probably the most important thing here, is requesting feedback from users during the trial. So during and after that piece, make sure you're gathering feedback from your team. on their experience as they're using the software. And this feedback is really going to be invaluable in assessing whether that software is going to be a good fit for your lab. If a bunch of folks are struggling with learning it or having to kind of bend over backwards to fit their processes in, it might lead to sort of further issues adopting in the future. And so the last sort of tip here that I have for when you're evaluating software is to really sort of consider the vendor. At this point, you may have whittled down your list to maybe one or two potential good fits for the lab. And sometimes the vendor's experience and interactions with your team can really help you make that final decision on what's going to be the best overall. So during the trial, ask things like, did the vendor seem to understand the needs of your lab and really what you're struggling with? And did they seem experienced in solving that problem before, or was it more of a black box to them that left you trying to solve that problem kind of on your own? How is the vendor conducting training and ongoing support? Are they being really hands-on and proactive, or do they sort of point customers to a ticketing system? Any or all of these can work for your team, but just again, kind of understanding how you want that training and ongoing support to look like, and does that match kind of what your standards are? Were you provided with documentation as a resource, and was it clear and comprehensive as you were going through the trial? Can also be another sort of good indicator of what those interactions with the vendor might look like in the future. Taking a look at the pricing structure, of course, and making sure sort of that it fits within your budget, and both sort of now and in the future, and then talking about additional fees or costs associated with the solution. Sometimes these systems will sort of add in implementation or migration fees that you want to be aware of upfront for sure. And then most importantly, is it clear that other clients in a similar situation have been successful in using this software? And so were you provided with any references or resources that help demonstrate that in your search? And do you feel really confident that it's going to help you succeed as well? And then overall, I found that really in any sales process, that that how we sort of interact with the vendor is always going to be a good indicator of how I feel working with that company later. So if they're super responsive and know what they're doing, it's usually a great indicator that that we're going to be successful, from buying a car to buying software. And of course, you don't want all of this work that we've covered in like a 30-minute time span, but might take you days or weeks or months depending on the length of it. You don't want this work to go to waste. And so, once you've made this decision, it's really, really important to start prepping your lab for success. And this is where kind of that organization and adoption in the lab is going to be really, really vital to getting you out of spreadsheets. And as a trained data scientist, this is my very favorite part. It's my favorite part to talk about. It's my favorite part to do. It's my favorite part to sort of interact with clients. If it's not your favorite part, I guarantee there's somebody in your lab that loves to do this. So really get them involved in this process as well. So you'll want to start organizing these spreadsheets and getting them ready kind of for a new system. And in order to do this most efficiently, you want to first understand what are the accepted formats that the software will be able to import. So talk to the vendor about this, look at the documentation, ask the vendor if they have any resources or templates that are going to help guide you here. And then also work to establish a timeline of what data you want to organize first. Going back to sort of the previous slide, there's lots of vendors that will help you with this process. So feel free to ask them about this even during the trial, before that decision it has been made, and see kind of what that interaction might look like when you're ready to get there. Decide on how you'll want to switch to the new solution. So oftentimes, customers who want to migrate, we talk about a couple different options. So there's something called like a rolling migration, where we can move over or migrate sort of active projects first and then legacy projects. Or we can do sort of a complete migration and move all of the data over at a single time. And then in some cases, a lot of times for ELNs, frankly, most people will choose not to do a data migration and just cut over to a new system. So, we're using paper today, and tomorrow we're going to start using a new notebook, or we're going to close out those notebooks and then start any new notebook in our electronic system. This is also a super great time to consider what information you're capturing in the lab and what information that you may want to keep of like, yes, we definitely want these fields. They're super useful. Making maybe modifications. We've been capturing a received date, but it's not in sort of a date format. We want to change that and clean that up a bit, maybe start requiring those fields. And then also consider what data you want to stop collecting. Maybe that's because it's sort of unreliable or just unimportant for what you're doing within the lab. Once you've sort of decided on which data you want and how it needs to look, you can start to consolidate and clean your data. And oftentimes clients will have sort of multiple spreadsheets that are very similar. And so consolidating them into one file, or even going through a consolidation effort and saying, we have 100 spreadsheets in the lab and we want to just consolidate them to a single drive. So when we're doing the migration, we know where they're at. We're not going through and sort of searching for things that might be missing. Some vendors will help with this and give you advice. So again, sort of reaching out to the vendor and asking for those resources. Other things that vendors might help you with is sort of data cleaning, which usually is the process of just making sure that the data is what you say it should be, sort of like in that date example, that dates are dates and not text fields or something like that. And so assuming we've gotten all the way to the end here, the most important thing is to really try and prevent folks from going back to spreadsheets. Change is hard. I get it. I've been there. And it's really easy for all of us to sort of default back to that thing that we know, and that's easy and convenient, that we talked about at the beginning. So putting those measures in place to really encourage adoption is going to help ensure success here. So making sure that you're doing a lab training with the new system. Sometimes vendors will provide this, or power users or lab managers will want to do this themselves. My recommendation is to have a training that's actually co-led by the vendor and the lab, so you can really balance that detailed product knowledge with the knowledge of the unique lab processes. Finding ways to provide value quickly for folks. So creating those quick wins, like the ability to find a sample easily or generate a report with a click of a button, can really help gain that excitement for using the system, and will help remind folks of the value when they're faced with this process of learning something new. Putting measures in place to help adhere to those new processes. So sometimes putting sort of timelines around, we're going to try this for 3 months or 6 months, or guide rails in place that help folks adhere to a new system, are going to help with that compliance. But really, if you've sort of done your due diligence up to this point, this is hopefully a lot less of sort of like a hammer approach and more of just a gentle reminder to folks in the lab that we all chose this solution, and we want to give it a fair shot. In that vein, also making sure you're super receptive to feedback. So making sure that the team feels comfortable in sharing sort of frustrations or ideas that they have for improvement are going to give them some ownership of the product and help them feel empowered to make the process better in the future as well. And then lastly, utilize those resources that your vendor is providing. So oftentimes this will be, documentation, onboarding, training, and that's going to help reduce sort of the burden on you as a decision maker, and really allow you to get back to focusing on the science piece of this much more quickly. So hopefully you've seen kind of what this process might look like to move your lab out of spreadsheets and into a more modern data management system. That's really going to help with that data integrity, streamlining workflows, and ultimately sort of accelerating your science. I want to talk about LabKey for a second. And we have been working with scientists, including scientists like myself, for over 20 years, and we are expert in sort of all things data management. We have created built-to-purpose tools for sample management, ELN, LIMS, including things like freezer management, sample accessioning and lineage tracking, capturing experiment components like instrument data and workflows. And we really do pride ourselves on sort of this unparalleled support and feel that sort of your success is our success. And we frequently work with labs that are moving out of spreadsheets into their very first data management system. And we make sure to help you sort of at every step of the way in that journey, from migration and implementation to training and ongoing support. So if you're interested in learning more about how LabKey can help, you'll get a link kind of at the end of this to schedule some time with me or to do a demo, and happy to kind of chat about what problems your lab might be facing, and how we might be able to help support that. So with that, I'd like to thank you for your time and participation today. And I look forward to any questions that you guys might have. So again, kind of put those in the chat or the Q&A, and I will get to them. So I think a common thing I'll just kind of share that people sort of struggle with, or when we're meeting with new folks, is that they're almost embarrassed of sort of the state of things. And I have seen it all at this point. I was in a lab that we weren't even using spreadsheets. I think we were writing down on a piece of paper where things were in a freezer, and finding, mouse livers and tinfoil, when we did our sort of, semi-annual freezer clean out. So it really is everybody starting from somewhere. We have seen it across the gamut, and really are able to sort of help support you in this. So yeah, so looking at some of these kind of questions, our solutions are very sort of low code or no code. So things like our sample management and LIMS functionality really don't require somebody to code at all. They're all sort of point and click customizations of adding user fields. We are also very, very um, intent on making sure that labs can manage and adapt their system on their own. So making sure that it doesn't require any type of special skill set to do that has been really paramount for us at LabKey. And yes, a LabKey could replace an ELN. We do have a fully integrated data connected electronic lab notebook that's part of our sample management product, and definitely have had many labs either migrate from other existing ELN solutions or from sort of paper notebooks into our ELN. And yeah, I'm seeing kind of requests about the user interface and functionality. If you're interested in that, schedule some time with me. I'm happy to do a demo. We also have lots of resources on YouTube that kind of show off the product. We're super proud of it and not scared to sort of show you. So happy to do that in a smaller format as well. I find that allows you to kind of get the most out of the process. And yeah, so a geotechnical soil testing lab. We have had some folks kind of adopt us in that space. And I will say that it's, not our primary customer base, but we have certainly had those conversations, and We're very flexible with the type of data that you can capture within the system. And so we find that where other systems are fall a bit short in that way, that you're able to customize it for what you need. And yeah, same for kind of the core lab, sequencing lab scenario. We definitely have several of those folks kind of tracking samples within the system. We've got lots of flexible ways to kind of capture the DNA library prep that you're doing and downstream things. So definitely a tool that could help those labs as well. Give maybe one more second for questions here. Yeah, absolutely. So I'll definitely be sort of reaching out to folks here, and we can schedule some time to do a demo. Happy to do it for sure. Yeah, and so kind of a question on cost. So we are super transparent about our pricing. It's on our website, but I'll kind of share sort of on the top of my head here. The minimum cost is sort of $99 per user per month. And a user in this case is sort of a unique email for folks to log in. And then it kind of goes up from there depending on what your needs are. Awesome. Well, thank you guys so much. I hope everyone has a good afternoon, good evening, good rest of your morning, and I hope to do a demo for you soon.